Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert, Meyer, Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of science fiction and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. I'm Robcasting from right here in the Robservatory at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 1084. A little scratchy there. I want to thank all of you for tuning me in when you could be watching the Golden Globes. I know, scintillating, but it's true. Listen, I went out to the mailbox today and picked up some mail, and I noticed I got a letter. And not a letter, it was not a summons. You know, it was not a garnishment of my wages. It was an actual real letter. And it was written by our own moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson. And I didn't know if it was going to be a letter of resignation or something, but no, it was not. And I read it and I thought to myself, I must immediately share this on the show. So I'm going to do that. This is from our own moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson. I mean, when he's not making pictures of me as a Funko Pop, he's writing these kinds of letters. Greetings, Rob. Today, I wanted to deviate from the normal talk about pop culture and film. Trust me, I have another letter about that in my pipeline, but this letter will be a bit different, but also really special. I'd like to talk about three things: grief, community, and friendship. So 2 days before Christmas, the YouTube theme park community lost a big trailblazing vlogger, Adam the Woo. Long story short, Adam not only went to theme parks, but he was one of those early vloggers who lived out of a car, a van, and an RV. He traveled back and forth across America through some forgotten roads and towns, and as of this past year, started traveling overseas. The community that Adam built was special, but I didn't know how big it was until he passed. I am a part of a Facebook group called Adam the Whovians, and some people who were friends of Adam's are friends of mine. When news of Adam's passing turned out to be true, myself and the entire community were in shock. His last vlog was that Sunday before Christmas. Now here is where his community and the community you have built come together. In the past almost 2 weeks, I have seen members of Adam's community come together and support each other. I've never seen anything like this. People sharing memories of their favorite moments and favorite whoisms and favorite vlogs. That community, like the PGS community, comes together and supports each other when the chips are down, and just like the PGS, the friendships are strong. Strong because Adam, like you, has created a community of friendship. Sadly, I never got a chance to meet Adam in person, but if anything, it has shown me how real people deal with grief and are there for each other. It is really quite moving. His passing was covered by TMZ, People Magazine, Entertainment Tonight, and so many other news outlets. Even Tom Wilson, yes, Biff from Back to the Future, posted a tribute to Adam. It goes to show how far and wide someone's kindness and positivity reaches. Which brings me to you and my friendship with you. What means so much to me is that if I accidentally butt dial you, you will call me back and ask if I'm okay. That means the world to me because you don't have to do that, and I'm not making you do that. You choose to do it because of friendship. A lot of us in the PGS community are friends with you, and you make us feel like we're the most important people in the room. Adam had a way of making people feel that way as well. What Adam leaves behind is something you have all told us at one point or another. Get out there and see things. See things as in the world or town or states around us. Make the journey our own. That is exactly what I did back in June. I got on a train and I traveled 924 miles to Springfield, Illinois. So instead of saying I'm going to do it over and over and over, I just did it. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I think everyone should put some money aside and take that journey and visit someplace new. And don't go to the commercial food businesses. Try and find out where the locals go and try some of the local wares and food choices. One of Adam's friends in a vlog discussing how he felt about his passing said, "If you think you knew Adam from watching his vlogs, then you did. Because who he was on screen is who he was in person. Always willing to talk with people and learn about them, just like you. Grief is hard and weird, and many people deal with it in their own way. I saw how much you were hurting when you talked about losing your sister. I tell people this: don't mourn for Adam or someone who has passed. Celebrate who they were and what they brought into your life. Have you ever seen a funeral in New Orleans? They don't just have a funeral, they have a party and a parade celebrating that person. You see, if we focus on the bad parts, the good parts never show as much. I mean, the bad parts go with the good parts, but sometimes they overshadow things. Life is like that. So, I want to say thank you for being my friend and being you, and recommending books and movies and giving life advice. You're like the older brother I wish I had. You know, the one that takes you aside and says, expand your movie palette. I hope, like you and Adam, that I make an impact on someone's life and inspire them to go forward and make the journey on their own. Thanks for listening and reading my letter. Join me next time when I write about some of the films from Criterion I got over the holidays. Ooh, a sneak peek. All the best, Tom Jr. Jackson. Well, Tom, I want to also thank you very, very much for being a friend of mine and also for writing that very nice letter that you actually had to sit down, type, and actually print out and mail to me. You don't get that anymore, and you'd mentioned a letter, but I thought it was just an email, and I was looking for something, and I didn't find it, and then I was pleasantly surprised to find this in the mailbox today. So thank you very much. And as I have to say, one of the byproducts of doing this channel is meeting people and talking to people that I never thought I would be able to talk to. That's how I met Roy Lee, producer Roy Lee, who he was already kind of an idol of mine before I talked to him, but he reached out to me to actually correct me about something I was incorrect about. Actually, it was something I'd forgotten. And he was very nice. At first, I didn't even believe it was him. I wrote back and I'm like, is this really you? But it was. And Max Allen Collins, who was on the show this morning, has become a dear friend. We've now worked together and made something we're both very proud of. And by the way, if you don't have Max Allen Collins' novel, The Return of the Maltese Falcon, what's wrong with you? Go get it. And get the original while you're at it and read them both. But that's one of the things that social media has done that was an unexpected byproduct of being online, is I've met so many nice and interesting people. You know, I remember Polly from Latino Slant, who I think is a great guy. We had never met in meet space before. And I said, hey, dude, you want to go see Matrix Resurrections? And the funny thing is, you know, when you're talking to people online, you never get a sense of how tall they are. And like Paulie was this really strapping, handsome dude. He's like 6'2". And when I saw him, I mean, he's a good looking dude. You can see that on camera, but he had a presence about him in person that was really inviting, you know, and he was really nice and it was really fun. And I wish I lived a lot closer to some of the people that I've streamed with for a long time. And I can't, because we don't. And I'd like to, if I had made more money, I'd take this show on the road and finally do Robservation Nation or go Robservation International. But Tom, thank you for sending me that letter. I very much appreciate it. Now, somebody else that I very much appreciate is my friend Alvaro. You know him, you love him. He's been on the channel before. Alvaro Zino Samaro, author of the book Equimedian, which you can also get. Where's my copy? I can't reach it. You can also get on Amazon. Alvaro, hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Rob.
Well, you know, it's funny. Last night, you called me up. And you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put you into a 2-shot with me. So you called me up, and why don't you tell the folks at home, what was I doing the moment you called me?
I believe you were watching Captain America Civil War.
I was watching Captain America Civil War. That is absolutely true. And it was funny. I was about, I want to say like an hour. It was the scene where the Winter Soldier escapes and Black Panther and Captain America go after him. They're in, I believe, Vienna. And, we started talking, and the thing that struck me as I was watching the film was just how good it was. I'm like, man, this is really great stuff. And I was so just entranced by how good this movie was. Some people call the movie Avengers 2.5. But as I'm watching it, as I'm putting you in the show, it just struck me that the reason I was enjoying this movie so much is, one, the character stuff is all great. Like, in the movie does a lot of different things. When it starts out, you see Tony Stark, you're watching a scene with him as a young man, like he's still basically a teenager and he's talking to his parents, and then you realize you're watching a projection and he's at MIT speaking, Tony Stark is, and he gives everybody scholarship money or money for their grants for their projects. So you meet Tony Stark, you have a great action sequence with Wanda, with Falcon, and with Captain America. They're going after Remlo from Winter Soldier, and it's an incredible action sequence. I mean, there's fisticuffs, there's superheroics. But as I was watching the movie, the thing that struck me was peak verisimilitude. Even though I'm watching a movie about superheroes, it is firmly set in the real world. The action scene in Lagos, they go to Vienna, and whether they're on, then they go to the German airport, and there's the big airport battle. But when you're watching this, the way the characters act toward one another, the way they act in the situations that they're in, it is very grounded. It's very much of the real world. And the Russo brothers, I remember reading interviews with them before they started making Winter Soldier, how they went back and watched movies like Heat, and they watched action films that they really admired, Die Hard, things like that. Like how were they kind of what Jonathan Frakes did before he made First Contact. And they were both looking at these things, and they really brought that. I mean, Civil War was only their second Marvel film. They went on to do Infinity War and Endgame, and now they're currently embroiled in post on Avengers Doomsday. But when I was watching this movie, I was loving it. I hadn't seen Civil War in a while. I'm like, God, the juggling act of this movie and the sprawling nature of the story. You meet the antagonist, you meet Baron Zemo, you meet Black Panther for the first time, and they have this really brief moment before T'Chaka's, Black Panther's father, dies, when it's just a great economy of storytelling where in just a moment you have this father and son exchange. You know exactly who they both are. And the Marcus and McFeely, the writers of that film, who I believe I met when we were making the behind-the-scenes stuff for Chronicles of Narnia, because they wrote that as well, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's just, as a superhero film goes, as an action film goes, as a character film goes, as a science fiction film goes, as a political thriller goes, this is a frothy, heady mix that is working beautifully. And it's about superheroes. And yet, you don't feel you're watching a superhero movie. This is just as important. It felt like I got the same joy out of it I got from watching Hunt for Red October for the 87 millionth time. Why do you think that is? And how did our conversation go when I first started trying to articulate this to you last night? You brought up a scale from 1 to 100, and I found it fascinating. So could you tell the folks at home how you related back to me what I was trying to convey to you?
Yes, absolutely. So we were talking about essentially what is the suspension of disbelief, right?
Yes.
Verisimilitude said differently. Suspension of disbelief, the ability for you to go along and accept the events that you're seeing unfold on the screen as though they are actually happening in a believable way. And the thing that I was mentioning to you was, I don't think that the MCU, particularly in the first 3 phases, I don't think that the success of the MCU was necessarily related to how outrageous or not outrageous the events that were on the screen were, but more about what consistency and the level of believability of the unreality was. Said differently, I don't think that the films really tried to present our world in a cinematic way and then populate our world with superheroes. What those films did, what that whole sequence of movies did, over what was it, 23 titles, was to build an alternate reality. And they did so in a very careful way. And the level of unreality of that alternate reality was low enough so that through the learning curve of the 23 movies, you could assume that it was as believable as ours. So the scale that I was using, I don't remember the exact example that I provided, but
Well,
if you take-
zero was our reality.
zero is our reality, right? So baseline, if you saw exactly what our world looks like on a film. I think I mentioned, I don't know, Thanos or something like that. Let's just say that would be 100. Something, or Galactus, right? Some completely comic book heavy character or space operatic element. And, I think, again, part of the success of those films is to build a reality that's somewhere maybe along 10. It's a little bit heightened and it's fantastical compared to ours. It's not at a 0, but it's a 10 that feels like a 0. And
Right.
part of the problem with everything that comes afterwards is that each additional movie seems to displace us from that 10 to higher and higher numbers. And it really doesn't do much thematically or character-wise to set things back to a more, closer to ground level, as it were, from an emotional perspective. So yeah, do you want me to say more? Or
Well, no, I mean, what's interesting to me is that the post-Endgame MCU, like the first post-Endgame MCU movie was Black Widow. And the thing about Black Widow, it begins when you meet Yelena and you see the two of them working together. And I really love all of that. I loved it. I love their relationship. But then you have this Russian version of a helicarrier, and there's this ridiculous climax where this thing is plummeting out of the sky and they're falling for 10 minutes, 20 minutes or something. And to me, that sequence, while maybe it could happen, it took the first half of the movie that felt very grounded when you're meeting her family and you're seeing this flashback and what happened. I was with the movie, but then it kind of spun out of control, and it lost the grounding that I think that a movie like Civil War has from beginning to end. I mean, the Civil War never, I mean, with all the superheroics, even when Steve Rogers is grabbing a helicopter and holding on, because you can see his muscles, you believe that he's a super soldier, and you believe that he could do that. Holding that helicopter was going right up to the edge of believability, but you believe it because of the way it's presented and the character, how he is portrayed. And it doesn't go too far. Now, then I was bringing up something like Quantumania, which completely strains credulity. It spins off into La La Land, into literally fantasy land. None of it, when you got down into the quantum realm, felt real. It didn't give me, like when Christopher Nolan made Interstellar and shows you what a singularity looks like, it felt scarily real because he went to NASA and did the best he could. But it had, giant waves, and it had all kinds of stuff that was based in and around physics. Now, I'm not saying you have to make the quantum realm work according to physics, but it didn't work according to the MCU. I didn't believe it. And when you see at the end, you see the Council of Kangs, they're just utterly ridiculous. They don't convince at all. And the interesting thing about the Ant-Man films is the first Ant-Man movie literally has a climax in a child's bedroom on a toy train. But you're there. You're like, I believe this because the movie has made me believe this. And even though it's more of a comedy, you like Scott Lang, you like what he's doing. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe did, even when it went a little askew, like in The Incredible Hulk, I think part of the reason that movie was not as beloved is because when you see the Hulk and the Abomination fighting, you're watching these two CG creatures that are CG, and no matter how realistic it looks, it it sort of reaches escape velocity where the verisimilitude is shattered. But that's okay. But that's not a beloved movie. But even when we're introduced to Thor, and I think the greatest hat trick of the is it proper hat trick, was seeing Tony Stark, Thor, and Steve Rogers all be introduced in pretty different kinds of movies. And yet you believed that they could exist within the same universe. Because I remember seeing Iron Man, I'm like, this is really good. Like, I didn't know what it was going to be, but it focused on Tony Stark, and casting Robert Downey Jr. was genius. But it stayed grounded enough. Like, when he put on his Iron Man suit, nothing happened that broke verisimilitude for me. I believed it because the movie made me believe it. And when I was watching Civil War last night, I'm like, there's a million things that could have gone wrong in the way this movie was being presented. And to make me, I mean, you're watching, there's a car chase scene where you're watching Steve Rogers and Black Panther basically run at super speed, and it looks real. Like, it doesn't look like, even in the Flash movie, they've never been able to convince me Flash is actually running in the real world. But Civil War made me believe. And I was looking at this and I was thinking the entire phase 4, 5, and 6 of the MCU was while it had high moments like Spider-Man No Way Home, that movie gets away with a lot more. There's a lot of goofy shit that happens in that movie, but it's okay because the whole thing is a gimmick. You know, you got these villains coming from different universes, so there's an element of, okay, I'll go with you on this. Because I'm not supposed to believe it the way I believed in Civil War because it's about incursions and all that. What would you call that? Like, you as an author, when you're telling a science fiction story, you have to, and Equimedian does a really great job of initially creating a reality that you believe in. You know, and I think one of the great things about science fiction is when you are in the hands of a deft author, they make you believe in whatever scenario they're setting up. Some authors can't do that, but the best authors, I think, can. How would you describe that? It's not just world building. It's something more.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I think it's a combination of things. So let me pick on a couple of the titles that you mentioned. You know, I think part of what Spider-Man No Way Home benefits from is not only just the goodwill towards Spider-Man in general as a beloved, character, one of my favorite superheroes, but the fact that those characters that are being brought in have years and years of legacy stories that we've seen on the screen. So in a way, when a film establishes an interesting story featuring a character, it's like you're essentially you're creating a chip of goodwill towards that character that can be cashed in at a later time. And a lot of chips had been laid down on the Spider-Man front. With Steve Rogers, for example, again, I mean, you're looking at, what was it? Phase 1 was, I think, 6 films. Phase 2 was 6 films. Phase 3 was 11 or 12, so almost double the amount of the first 2 phases. And Steve Rogers obviously plays an integral part in the construction of all of that, as does Iron Man. And so that's a lot of goodwill chips, right? So that's one thing, which is just having having a lot of time, meaningful time that is spent between the audience and the character to build up an emotional relationship. Another thing that I think you sort of identify is the fact that the presentation of a lot of the characters originally in the first group, in the original Avengers team, the style of those films was designed and suited to express something about the characters. So the way that, as you were talking about, Thor is directed, when that film comes out in 2011, the Kenneth Branagh direction for that is very different from the way that Captain America First Avengers directed.
Very different.
And, again, very different from Ant-Man. In a sense, one of the techniques that I think you can use to increase that believability, which Ant-Man does, is if you're going to introduce a concept or an ask that is very unreal, where the unreality of that conceptually is very high, then the more that you build a narrative that is familiar around that, the more palatable it's going to become, right? So in Ant-Man, you have very clear direction. You have an extremely sympathetic, literally an everyman character who has very relatable problems, which, by the way, as does Spider-Man. So regardless of, multiverse shenanigans, he's still a very relatable character. And you then take that everyman, and the genres, stylistically, the genres that Ant-Man probably is closest to is a heist movie and a quirky character study. So, I mean, there's a lot of shorthand and visual and narrative conventions that film can take advantage of that are familiar. And then all of that familiarity is strong enough to buttress the one big thing, which is, okay, now we're going to shrink. And, like you said, we're going to end up with this absurd, sequence of events and the toys and in the bedroom and all of that stuff. So I think that is another way, having a really good understanding of what the correct tone is. But then also there's an element that is outside of the films, which is the connective tissue between the films themselves. And I think this is important, particularly for the first 3 phases of the MCU. It's very easy to understand that we are on a narrative path that has to do with the Infinity Stones, and that somebody's seeking the Infinity Stones, and that when a certain amount of these stones, these MacGuffins, have been assembled, something very bad could potentially happen. You can say that in even fewer words than I just did. And there is no such connective tissue starting with phase 4, right? In phase 4, you're just trying to constantly figure out what's the equivalent of the Infinity Stones? What is that thread that is connecting all of those different films together? And if you look at the films, as you were mentioning, starting with Black Widow, so Black Widow has a certain style, but that style it seems to be somewhat at odds with what the character of Black Widow is, because in a way it's a mishmash of styles that we've already seen in the first 23 films. It's kind of Winter Soldiery, but not exactly. It has elements of maybe Iron Man, but not exactly, and so on and so forth. Then we get to Shang-Chi, and now you have a new tone that's introducing that character that I think actually makes that a pretty good introduction of the character. But the problem is that there's not really a clear follow-up to that. And then you go from Shang-Chi to Eternals, and Eternals is a tone that's completely different from what we've seen before, and it does not seem well suited to the introduction of that particular brand of characters.
No, I just want to jump in and say I am an Eternals fan.
Right.
I do like the movie, but I also recognize that it just doesn't work in the MCU.
Right.
And also because I'm a Kirby fan, the whole thing with deviants, these creatures, and then we see it doesn't work at all.
Right.
These just these monsters that the Eternals weren't able to clean up this problem in multi-millennia. There's still these deviants running around the planet. I just didn't buy it. I also didn't buy, you're looking at this multi-ethnic group of people that kind of, like, it would have been more if they were all otherworldly, but they're examples of human beings from different parts of the world. And I'm like, why would you design a group of Eternals to look like this? And I like all the actors. I thought Kumail Nanjiani was great in the role. I loved the characters as they were portrayed. I just didn't believe that the Celestials would make these people into the Eternals. I mean, it's almost like they didn't feel otherworldly. They kind of betrayed the fact that they were, and I understand maybe they were made that way to fit in, but they'd been here for quite a long time, and it seemed like, they weren't spread out around Earth until later. It just felt like the whole idea behind Eternals didn't work. I also think that the thing that really, to me, ruined the MCU in phases 4, 5, and 6 was the introduction of the TVA. Because I don't think and we talked a little bit about this last night, I don't think the TVA in its conception or its portrayal, again, was believable because it's played as a parody of our own systems, like having bureaucracies and all that. And why is the TVA like that? And, why do they have library? Why does it look that way? It looks like it originated from earthbound systems. And whether Kang started it or not, I'm watching this going, if this is part of creation, wherever the TVA came from, and why is it so mired in earthbound tropes? I mean, it should be something that it should have been. If Christopher Nolan had created the TVA, maybe I would have believed it. But there's so many. You've got officers. There's TVA officers in outfits, and they've got their little weapons and things. I mean, I just looked at that. And I'm like, I don't believe this. It strained credulity for me, and it shattered. And so much of phases 4, 5, and 6 relied. They had the TVA, and by the time you get to the TVA and Deadpool's randomly killing TVA agents in the beginning of Deadpool and Wolverine, it's like, why are you killing them? Like, they're people. They're just doing their jobs for this clandestine organization that oversees all the timelines. I mean, what happened? Like, how would you define that? What would that be called from an authorial standpoint?
Well, I don't know that I have a single label for it, but I mean, I think, again, in terms of reality and the likeliness of the reality that you accept as a viewer, I think really look at all of the films from the first 3 phases. There's essentially sort of 2 mainline realities that are being built up, and I don't mean literal universes within the story. I just mean alternate realities to ours. One of them is the one that the majority of the films play in. And then the other one is the slightly more cosmic one that the Guardians of the Galaxy movies play in. The Guardians of the Galaxy feels, especially if you just watch, the first film back in 2014, it does feel quite at odds. You could make an argument that the Thor reality is quite different. However, a really successful thing that is accomplished by the original Thor, and even Thor: Dark World, despite all of its problems, is to show how that mythological realm interacts and actually connects with the reality that the rest of the films are setting up. So in a way, it sort of gets subsumed into the mainline reality. Now, one of the things that I was bringing up, which I think feeds into this, is, well, actually, let me add something to the reality point, and then I'll get back to this. Again, 2, maybe 3 realities over the course of 23 films, right? So, I think that the concept of time travel, which we get towards the end, towards the dramatic climax of the first 3 phases, time travel inherently on that scale of 0 to 100, it's very, very high. The unreality of time travel, because it raises so many questions, and you have to be careful about how you address those questions for the audience to feel that they're in safe hands and that not anything is possible, because you need restrictions for dramatic stakes. And so if you had introduced the time travel plot devices earlier there are limited forms of it, but if you had introduced time travel on the scale that they do towards the climax of the first 3 phases in phase 1 or in phase 2, you probably would have shattered a lot of what you had built. It was actually very smart, I think, to not front load time travel in the MCU, at least in that prominent way. Now, you get to phase 4, you get to phase 5, you get to phase 6. I mean, they call them the multiverse saga. That's one way that they've been referred to. And, in the stories, you have a lot of realities. But again, from a narrative perspective, you just seem to have every film seems to be introducing a new level of narrative reality. I mean, we just talked about, Eternals is one, right? Shang-Chi is another. You would think Shang-Chi is going to connect to the mainline one, but then you get Spider-Man No Way Home, which again veers in a different direction. Then you get to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which tonally and reality-wise feels completely different from what you've seen. And then you get to Thor: Love and Thunder, which doesn't even seem like an MCU film in the sense that it's more of a satire or a parody.
It's almost, it's nearly unwatchable.
It's sort of a farcical meta commentary on the types of films that you've been watching, but it's presented as one of those films. And then you get to Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So again, it's sort of a little bit of a feeling of whiplash to a completely different thing that we've been away from for a long time. As you pointed out, Ant-Man, Wasp: Quantumania almost feels like you're watching a Star Wars film or a Star Wars, adjacent property that is now in the MCU. You get to the Marvels, which is very offbeat and comedic and is now using elements of TV shows and other
I couldn't even, with the Marvels, I liked Captain Marvel, for the record.
Sure.
I enjoyed it. I saw it like 3 times in the theater. I didn't love it, but I liked it. I thought it was good. And I liked more of the cosmic, investigating more of the cosmic, seeing the Kree and a little bit of the Skrulls and all that, because that was such cornerstone Marvel lore when I was growing up, like the Kree Skrull War and everything. So I liked all that. But when I watch the Marvels, like the opening scene when they're looking for a MacGuffin and they're on that moon, right. I'm like, this looks like Superman 2. I'm looking at something that was really not well done, which surprised me because, again, you go back to Civil War, and there's nothing in Civil War that makes you go, I don't believe that. You believe, when Wanda is using her powers are designed in such a way that they interact with the real world, and they make you believe, especially that tragic explosion at the beginning when she's trying to contain the force from Rumlow, and Rumlow blows himself up, and she's holding that force. You believe it. They've figured out a way, and I often said that I think the best superhero movies are the ones that make us believe that those characters could be right outside our windows right now. Now, that's not true of everything. I mean, if you think about it, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you get Ego the Living Planet. You get the head of a Celestial in nowhere, in the first movie. But you still buy that because you have the extra added element of it's cosmic. You're in space. So in space, we know as viewers, we give a lot more leeway to where you're going to go. And the overtly comedic elements don't, for whatever reason, because James Gunn pulls that delicate balancing act off. You're watching a raccoon and a tree working together to steal back one of these Infinity Stones at an outdoor mall on an alien planet. And yet it feels like it belongs inside the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
But I think part of the way that it accomplishes that is that, again, the emotional development of the characters are made ultra relatable, right? And even the stories from a conceptual perspective are essentially non-science fictional stories. But the set dressing and, we were talking, right? So if you look at the Guardians films, there's a lot of classic elements of a story of an orphan looking for a family in the first film. There's a story about, working through estrangement and daddy issues in the second film. That's one way to read it. And then there's clearly a commentary on, treating other life forms, experiments on animals, things like that. The sanctity of life in the third film. So these are just very universal, super easy for people to become connected to in terms of the emotional stakes. And they're done in a way that allows you to, they're not bogged down by that. They're not pretentious because the humor is used, and the thrills of the adventure and all of these different action sequences keep you engaged from a plot perspective. But really, if you had the themes of some of the other films in the casing and the shell of Guardians of the Galaxy movie, it wouldn't work as well because it would be too much. It would be an overload.
And you see that. I mean, there were things even in phases 1, 2, and 3, like Doctor Strange, the end of Doctor Strange when he's confronting Dormammu, and that whole thing really, to me, pushed it right up to the edge. Right. Now, because I feel that I like Doctor Strange. Don't get me wrong. I really do. I didn't have a problem with Tilda Swinton being the ancient one. I like Doctor Strange, but Doctor Strange was the first time I'm like, yeah. I mean, Kamar-Taj, and they really pushed it. Yeah. It really felt like, okay, I'm still supposed to be on Earth, but I'm in. And Shang-Chi, for me, I love the wuxia genre of films. I love martial arts, mystical martial arts movies from Hong Kong and from Asia, from Japan and China and Korea. So I was willing to do that. But by the end of that movie, when they're having the big battle against the mystical forces and you're seeing the 10 rings being wielded, I'm like, okay, we're supposed to be on Earth, the same Earth that I was watching last night on Civil War. And that what you see happening in Shang-Chi would never happen in the Russo brothers' Civil War. They wouldn't do that. And what was interesting in, like, one of my favorite scenes in Infinity War was the conversation that Thor has with Rocket Raccoon. And they're having this really heartfelt conversation, and you're seeing these two characters, and it wasn't, Thor is not being goofy. Right. Like you were saying earlier, that both Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder are Taika Waititi movies as opposed to being MCU movies. and Ragnarok worked for the most part, but
But
Love
I,
and
and I
Thunder
would, yeah, and I
didn't.
would say Thor Ragnarok. I believe, I agree with you. I think that the end of Doctor Strange in 2016 starts to really push up against that, but they are also benefiting from that whole tradition of like the Seeker and Transcendence,
Sure.
and it's almost like Lost Horizon-ish in a way as well. This parallel reality where impossible things can happen and so on and so forth. But I think that really Thor Ragnarok, what is it, the 17th film? I think it contains the seeds of the future decline that the MCU experienced. And I think that part of that is because it does have the cosmic setting. By the way, I really enjoy the film as a standalone movie. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun. It's great fun. But the level of unreality and goofiness keeps getting dialed up and up and up, and it gets to the point where again it seems to live somehow in a realm that's different from a lot of these other films that we've been watching. And the I think that part of the lessons that were learned were the wrong lessons from Thor Ragnarok in terms of how successful it was. And leaning even more into that in some of the subsequent entries was exactly the opposite of what they needed. Now, the other thing that I'll say, coming back to your comment about timeline variant authority and all of these different branching realities, like time travel, that is an element which inherently has a huge unreality baggage that it brings into your story. And so
And it's anchored by the TVA, which is the most unrealistic thing that the MCU ever did. In my
right,
mind, the TVA was a fatal flaw to the MCU. Now, I know that they wanted to deal with certain issues in the comics, but the way it's depicted doesn't work at all. In my mind, it doesn't work at all. It didn't work in the comics.
right. And
It's this weird Terry Gilliam Brazil-like bizarre bureaucracy that has all of its roots on Earth. So we recognize it as this bureaucracy, but in reality, I'm like, I don't believe the TV. You can have the TVA if it was depicted not as some earthbound crazy bureaucracy.
right.
It's done not in a convincing way. The whole thing is a parody. It's all a joke. So
Yeah,
that to me was a completely a fatal flaw, and of course they're stuck with it. I will say I do appreciate what they did with it. That's all I'm going to say. But I mean, I don't mean to be cheeky. Somebody the Richard called me and said, don't, if you know things, don't lord it over people. But since this is about, it is what I wanted to get into is a discussion about why I personally think Avengers Doomsday is going to go right back. It's going to, not only is it going to be one of the great Marvel MCU movies, but I think people are going to look at, because when I was watching Civil War last night, I'm like, there's a lot of narrative threads happening in this film that are being effortlessly woven. The tapestry of that movie works really, really well. And I think they have, and again, the Russo brothers have not missed in the MCU. You have 4 banger movies. You got Civil War, you've got, first of all, Winter Soldier, then Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. And even people didn't like Endgame as much as Infinity War because it had to do a lot more, and you had time travel, and there was a lot of these. I mean, it pushes, again, Infinity or Endgame pushes right up against the edge of all of this, but they don't go over it because the stakes are so high. So you buy into it. But I ask you, do you think it's possible to write the MCU to because they want to go, we know they're going to do Secret Wars, and if you've read Hickman's Secret Wars story, there were incursions. The gist of it is kind of the same. There were incursions, and as a result of that, and as a result of all kinds of things, they kind of have a Loki position where Molecule Man was in that story. Doctor Doom creates Battle World, destroys the entire multiverse, and then the MCU is spun out of what happens in Secret Wars, and then it moves forward. And I think it's an in-universe reboot that's going to be able to serve them well. And we know that they're already developing an X-Men movie, and I would imagine they're going to do a pivot into the X-Men universe because they've got so many characters that they can draw from. They could do 30 movies with just X-Men characters and nobody would get tired of it because there's so many. It's such a deep roster of characters. But do you think that they can? Do you think they can right the ship? I guess that's my question.
Yes, but I don't think they can do it in a single film. And I think there's a couple of things in what you brought up. So first, I think that one of the things that Thor Ragnarok, one of the reasons I was saying it's probably contains the seeds of some of the issues that we see later on is because it starts to comment on stories themselves. And that is something that we see in other films, right? And the TVA and the Loki as the god of stories explicitly introduces this idea of commenting on the nature of storytelling within the stories. So there's a strand of metafiction that comes into some of these films that are very self-aware of the tropes of the genre and
Right.
that are too overtly playing with the tropes, commenting on them. That I think. It goes against, again, in that scale of 0 to 100, it's just adding numbers and not much is getting you back. Now, I will say, if I look at, the end of phase 5, I think that Captain America Brave New World absolutely didn't work as a film. And it was tactically a mistake to make a sequel to The Incredible Hulk from 2008 in the 35th movie of the MCU.
Yeah.
But what I will say in favor of Captain America: Brave New World is that the reality that they're trying to portray is that mainline reality that I was describing from the first 3 phases of the MCU. The story doesn't work, but the reality at least is more tempered, and the approach to that reality is a little bit more, restrained. The same is true of Thunderbolts, but Thunderbolts is a better film and it has a more convincing story. Still, it is trying to recapture that more grounded nature of the mainline reality from the first phases. Then you get Fantastic Four, which of course introduces a whole different reality with a different tone, and so you sort of suspend the good work that the other 2 films put in terms of that overarching suspension of disbelief. But I don't think that Avengers: Doomsday. I don't think it's possible for one film, particularly given how short, phase 6. I mean, it's not at the end of phase 6, right? It's like the second or third movie of phase 6. The first one was Fantastic Four. We've just started it. I don't think that it's possible for an oil tanker that is so far off course for it, in a single small degree order or command to completely right its course. It takes too much steerage and it takes more time for that to be corrected. And the other thing that I would say is, you have the part of what this show is about, or the description is the MCU's formula, right? I think that part of the formula is actually the way that stories are distributed across different films. So to me, you can't have a single film that brings back the formula. You need to consistently show that over a suite of films, if you will.
This is the 5th. I mean, I would say I agree with you, but this is the 5th Avengers movie.
Sure.
And it's the 3rd Avengers movie that have been directed by the Russo brothers. And clearly we know, and here's the thing. There have been so far that we've seen. I know that they've talked about this new Wakandan trailer that's coming out. I guess it's out this weekend, but it'll probably go online on Tuesday. But we've seen 3 of these character pieces from Doomsday, and they are the tone of them is very much a real world tone. And then it does things like we finally get that Cyclops ripping his visor off, which is something we never got even in the Fox X-Men movies. So they're very cognizant of the fact that fans want to see certain things in these films, and they're going to give them to us. But I really liked the tone of it and the feel of it. Like, I love that shot in the Captain America segment where you see the camera panning up and you see the windmill and the motorcycle going through this very beautiful middle America location, and then he walks up to the house, that we see at the end of Endgame, and even Thor, I mean, it's like Ragnarok and Love and Thunder never happened. When you see Thor in the woods talking to the All, looking for the power of the All Fathers or whatever, and what he's saying is, grant me the strength for one last battle to save. And it's so funny because it's the character of Love from Thor: Love and Thunder has become so critical to him, but it feels like you're in a totally different realm, so to speak. You're not in any kind of a fantasy realm. His and you see both Steve Rogers with a child and Thor's talking about his child. And then obviously there's Franklin Richards and there's other people, and how all this is going to tie together, everyone will find out. But the tone seems to be correct. And since they are building off of what we're getting in Endgame, we know that story was not over. We know when we saw Endgame, when old Steve Rogers comes back and they're like, "Are you going to tell us anything about the life you've led?" And he's like, "No, I don't think I will." And it's a great moment because when he leaves, he doesn't have the shield. And when he comes back, he has the shield. So that there's going to be a shield, a place where maybe Sam, I mean, it would be interesting if Sam gave him the shield at some point, and he how does that happen? It becomes that cool causality kind of loop. Wait a minute, how can Sam give me the shield if I haven't given it to him yet? So, I mean, how does that, there's all that kind of, but it feels to me like the tone itself already establishes that realistic, call it down to earth, but the tone that we want from these movies. We want to see the best superhero depictions are always the ones where you have the most humanity, even in our godlike characters. So they're relatable to us, and that's what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did so well. Never better than it did it in Civil War. Or even in Winter Soldier, when you meet Sam Wilson for the first time, and there's the whole On Your Left, and Captain America, Steve Rogers, is lapping him when they're jogging around the mall in D.C. So,
yeah, I mean,
do you think that? Well, I mean, Doomsday is going to be a 3-hour movie. I mean, it's going to be a 3-hour movie.
Sure.
And so you don't think with that amount of time and the Russo brothers back to direct that they could make us forget about the phases because they're going to kind of leapfrog over those movies? I mean, we know a lot of the characters, like Shang-Chi is finally coming back, but I don't think, people liked his movie and stuff. I liked it. Some people didn't, but it wasn't the Doug Mensch, Paul Gulacy, James Bond meets Bruce Lee, which is what Shang-Chi started out as, but it wasn't that Shang-Chi that I love. But I mean, I still think that you can make it work.
Well, listen, I want the film to be as good as it can possibly be. I'm rooting for this film to be a banger. But I think that it has two things going against it that are significant challenges. One is a contextual challenge. I think that the farther that we get along into the MCU, either the more that you are correctly building on what has come before, which again, the first 3 phases exemplify sort of almost like a textbook example on how to do that, or the more you, as you yourself just pointed out, are having to leapfrog and dismiss things. The problem is not so much that you can't make the audience forget, in my opinion, something that was unsuccessful by vaulting over it. The problem is that you no longer have the benefit of building your new real estate on that thing because you've had to dismiss it because it didn't work, because it wasn't thought out in as careful a manner as they were before. So what I mean by the first challenge of that this film has to solve contextually is that it's sort of put in an impossible situation where it has to try to generate the same emotional response as 2 other Avengers films that had over 20, for the most part, super consistent entries preceding them. This one does not. This one does not have the benefit and the careful investment over time from a loyal audience that has consistently been showing up, which the audience has not been doing to these films, to leverage that, kind of super, super strong emotional impact. I'd say that's the first thing. And the second thing, which is very related to this, is, let's just look at the numbers for a second in terms of, again, attendance and kind of box office. when we were going through the first phases of the MCU, I mean, I like to look at the ratio of worldwide box office to production budget, right? So like gross to budget. And if you do the weight math for the phases, so we're going to assign one number to each phase, and that number is the ratio for the sum of production budget and sum of worldwide box office for that particular phase. Phase one has a ratio of about 3.8. So pretty good, pretty solid, right? But as far as these kind of popcorn movies go, you move to phase two, it goes up to 4.4. That's incredible. Not only are you know continuing to maintain that consistency, you've actually upped your ROI over a whole slew of 6 more films. And then you double the output when you get to phase 3, or almost double it with 11 new films, and you're at a 5.7 multiplier. You're at a ratio of 5. That's unbelievable that you could scale up consistently phase after phase after phase with all of those different titles. Now, what happens when you get to phase 4? It declines to 3.9. And when you get to phase 5, it declines further to 2.9 or 2.8. And that is a significant, I don't think that's part of the reason why I just don't think that, here's how I would say it from first principles. If Avengers Doomsday was as good subjectively a film as Infinity War, it would not be as successful or as good a film as Infinity War because of all of this other stuff that is around it. And that's a problem.
Well, I would posit that
please pause it. I like it when you pause it.
I mean, I'm putting a pause on it, but
yeah.
Here's the thing. I think that first of all, you know, you are bringing in this is the thing about Doomsday that I find shocking. I was there. I was, you know, when Robert Downey Jr. was announced, you know, in Hall H at Comic-Con that he was going to play Dr. Doom. And at first, now I have to say, I knew this was going to happen. I had a discussion with somebody, I'm not going to say who, about this very subject a long time before it was announced. Somebody asked me, what would you think if?
Right.
And it was explained to me how it was going to work. And I'm like, well, that's a fucking crazy idea, but I like it. You know, when I heard this idea floated, and I went down a rabbit hole, so going, well, wait a minute, you know, and some of the things that are, we know that Dr. Doom is so, Dr. Doom and the Fantastic Four go together like, you know, chocolate and peanut butter. We saw the shot in Fantastic Four where they had the Latvian delegate was not in his chair. Correct. You know, and so we know that Latveria exists on the Fantastic Four world. So they've told us in Fantastic Four that Doom is coming from the Fantastic Four world because,
well, we even saw the cape, right? Credit scene.
Yeah, we saw. That's right. We saw Doom himself at the end, which is actually just like the end of both the end of Thunderbolts and that post-credit scene in Fantastic Four. You know how they made a big deal. Well, the Russo brothers directed those. Right. They didn't come in and go, "Oh, let us direct your post-credit sequences." Those sequences were lifted directly out of Doomsday. You know, and that and you can tell. I mean, look at the way that the Thunderbolts is shot. The Thunderbolt post-credit sequence doesn't look anything like the rest of Thunderbolts. I mean, it's like it's not just, and that's fine. But and they've done that before.
Yeah, let me make a quick interjection though, because we're on the topic of Doom, and I think this is significant as well. I would argue that the majority of people knew that the big bad in the first 3 phases of the MCU was Thanos because of the MCU films. I would argue that the majority of people know that Doom is the big bad that we're headed towards in, you know, phase 6 because of things that happen outside of the MCU. And that again is a narrative problem because that means that you haven't planted the seeds of your dramatic climax in the way that they should have been planted. So to me that's an issue that all of the Hall H reveal, et cetera, overshadows the narrative presence of Doom that we've had in the film so far.
Okay, then let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Pretend you and I haven't had a discussion about this movie before. How then do you think that Doom should be handled in Avengers Doomsday? Like, how, if you were in charge, and as an author and as somebody who's written many short stories, and you published your first novel, and you've talked to many different authors, and you're a huge Marvel Comics fan, how do you think that Marvel should go about introducing the character of Doom? We've seen in Doom interacting with Franklin Richards. That's all we've seen.
Yeah.
That clearly, and Sue Storm didn't seem that particularly shocked to see him, so we know they probably know each other.
Right.
And Doctor Doom is a sorcerer, and, you know, talking to Franklin, she didn't just freak out going, "Oh my God, who are you?" You know, it wasn't like that. How do you think that they should introduce the character of Doom in Avengers Doomsday?
Well, I would say, again, let's go by the template of Thanos that we have from the first 3 films. You build up to Doom, and you show glimpses of Doom through multiple other movies. You start like they did.
Well, you know, but I mean, you know, they're not going to do that. Like, I'm talking about the actual reality of what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
We're now we're 11 months away,
Sure.
almost, from seeing this movie. So we know for a fact that we're going to see Doctor Doom presented in a way. The glimpse we had at the end of Fantastic Four, he's got the cloak on. We've seen things like style sheets of the armor, which looks very faithfully. How do you think they should do it? Like, if you were writing the script for Avengers Doomsday and you had to introduce Doom in this movie, how would you do it?
I'm not going to give you the specifics of recipe because I'd have to sit and think about like breaking that story. But what I will tell you is that I think that the single most important thing would be to spend a fair amount of time focusing on Doom, focusing on his origins, his story, his relationships, and his dynamics with the other characters. And one of the problems with the TVA is that when they introduce the TVA, retroactively, when you start to think about all the events that we've experienced before we knew that the TVA was there, it's very difficult to reconcile intellectually how all of that worked with the TVA working behind the scenes. And that's the similar issue that now is a little bit, depending on what the origins are of Doom, that is potentially a problem for this. Because again, if we are going back to Endgame and Infinity War, which in a lot of ways had satisfying resolutions for characters like, Steve Rogers, right? And Iron Man, etc. My concern is that if Avengers Doomsday is not only going to lean into the multiverse aspect, which we've agreed has a high degree of unreality, but is also going to leverage time travel, which compounds the unreality problem, and is going to try to introduce the character of Doom in a way that's satisfying, that emotionally makes sense and that the audience can follow. It's a lot of asks for a 8-hour movie, let alone a 3-hour movie. And so that is one of the things that I think is going to be difficult for it to surmount. Now, again, I want it to be really entertaining. I want it to be an absolute, thrill ride. And I hope that it does point us back in the right direction. But I think that one of the things that makes Infinity War and Endgame so rewatchable, just like as you were doing the other day, Captain America, Civil War, is the fact that everything that comes before and that comes after is closely connected. It's aligned, it's tied, and it's satisfying emotionally. Even if Avengers Doomsday is really, really great, which I hope that it is, it's not, I don't think it's going to inherently have the level of rewatchability, because it's going to be more like seeing an amazing trick. It's going to be like going up to this magic show and saying, wow, David Blaine not only made the Statue of Liberty disappear, he made the solar system disappear. How do you do that? But once you've seen the trick, you're still missing the emotional involvement or attachment to all of the things that are outside of that trick. And so I think that that's going to be difficult to surmount. And I'll say one other thing too, not to again be too much of a negative Nancy, but we know that this is building to Secret Wars because the release date of Secret Wars has been out, right? So unlike the situation with Infinity War and Endgame, where there was no real clear line of sight into a post-Endgame world, at least not for the main Avengers characters, we know that a significant amount of characters have to be situated in a certain way by Secret Wars. And so that also inherently reduces the stakes of what Doomsday can do in terms of moving things and really putting central characters, in serious jeopardy.
Okay, now let me ask you another question. So they have given us, in addition to everything that's going on with the MCU, they've given us the additional wrinkle of adding the Fox X-Men characters to the mix. Right. Now, they started that out. We saw Professor Xavier and a different version of Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness.
Right.
We saw they brought back Frazier, at the end of the Marvels. We got to see Beast. Yeah. So I guess Monica Rambeau is on the Fox X-Men world, and now we saw Deadpool and Wolverine, which are two characters. They made an MCU movie entirely about two Fox X-Men characters, and that transition was very smooth. And now we know that Charles Xavier, our Charles Xavier, not the Charles Xavier that was belonged to the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness, but our Charles Xavier and our Magneto.
616, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is like we know, like, we never saw Gambit before until Gambit is actually a Fox X-Men character we never saw that has now been introduced by Marvel into the universe, who's now retroactively going to be a character that's belonged to the Fox X-Men universe, which is fucking insane. I mean, I love it, but it's kind of fucking crazy that they introduced the Marvel Cinematic Universe gave us the Fox Elektra, gave us the New Line Blade.
Well, wasn't there a Gambit in X-Men Origins Wolverine?
There was, played by Taylor Kish.
So technically.
So, but not the same character at all.
Not the same character. Yeah.
Just like there was Deadpool, that's not the same character. I mean, Deadpool was changed within the Fox X-Men universe, right. and so it's just different characters. I mean, there's so much craziness going on. So let me ask you this: by adding in, so we know we're going to get Rebecca Romijn is in it, so older Mystique is in it, Gambit is in it. Xavier and Magneto are in it. Beast is in it because Kelsey Grammer's been talking about it.
Yep.
We don't know who else. Like, are there going to be X-Men? Because we've seen in X-Men Days of Future Past, you had both the young X-Men and the old X-Men together.
Right.
And so are we going to see different? Do you think we're going to see different versions of the X-Men? Like, are they going to have any of the first class Days of Future Past Apocalypse characters in with the rest of the Fox X-Men or not?
Well, I think an interesting question is, what does the introduction of the X-Men and however many variants they decide to introduce them in, how does that serve the narrative needs of Avengers Doomsday? And I'd say that there's, in my opinion, at least two things that happen when you make that decision. Which, like you said, we know that we're going to get some of them for sure. On the one hand, I think that it's a benefit. It's a net plus in the same way that I was mentioning before, where bringing in previous versions of Spider-Man legacy characters from the other trilogies or from the other, the 3 movies and the 2 movies, helped the emotional stakes of Spider-Man No Way Home, because there is still attachment to previous versions, especially if you have the same actors playing them as in previous days, and that immediately gives you a palpable connection between the audience and those characters. So that's a plus. The negative is that by doing that, you are now taking away time, which again, even if it's 3 hours, it's a finite duration to this movie, from the newer characters, including Doom, which require more of that, kind of gentle, consistent character building to get up to the same level of emotional investment. So I think it's a mixed bag. And I think that the more surprising or wacky the choices are, the more exciting it is in the moment, but again, the less rewatchable it makes it. And I say that by using as an analogy Deadpool and Wolverine. I think that Deadpool and Wolverine was a really fun experience in the cinema. I have only seen it once.
Me too. Yeah, I didn't even buy it. I know you look. I never thought there would come a time when I wouldn't buy. Like, I've got the first, and the thing is, they're shitty the 4Ks are, a lot of them are upscaled.
Yeah.
But the sound, I mean, Disney went out of their way to give the enhanced IMAX versions, put them on Disney Plus. The sound is better on Disney Plus. So it's actually, as much as I bought all the Marvel movies, I didn't even buy Deadpool and Wolverine. I didn't buy it. And I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I just felt when I watched that film, it was annoying to me because it's almost like a non-movie.
Right.
You know, it's got all these...
That's exactly what I'm saying, that there could be moments of feeling like you're watching a non-movie, little bubbles of non-moviness within the bigger movie. And that's a risk.
Right. Now, the thing is, I kind of, that I know that I know things. I drink and I know things.
Don't know anything. I would posit that you're very well informed, but I have no...
Very well informed, I would say, when it comes to this story. And the thing to me that struck me the most watching Civil War is the movie that we're going to get in 11 months has a lot in common, I think, with the way that Civil War unfolds.
Now, let me ask you a real simple question about that. Would you describe Civil War as a movie that features superheroes or as a superhero movie?
I would say it's a movie that features superheroes.
Now, answer the same question based on whatever information you may or may not have about Avengers Doomsday.
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer because the situation is inherently fantastical in Doomsday. Because they're going to end up with a battle world, or something. I would assume so because that's where it's going. We know it's going. It's not the Secret Wars with the Beyonder, although the Beyonders did. There was a part of the Hickman storyline where you have Molecule Man, you have the Beyonders, but that would have been something like the lead up to Doomsday. You would have had to play it like they played it in the comics. Right. You would desperately need to have that lead up if you're going to deal with the Beyonder's hilarious, but you can't. The Secret Wars from the 80s they could never do that because it's so silly compared to now. Yeah. But we know if you look at and having read Secret Wars and the Secret Wars Battle World, the omnibuses, which I recommend anybody reads because they're just fun to read. But
the box set is amazing if you can still find it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I didn't get that, but it's pretty. I would say that the situation that they're dealing with is not like Civil War, because Civil War is a grounded, earthbound. I mean, just the idea of the Sokovia Accords in itself. And when you see the was it Viola Davis? Is Viola who has the cameo as her son died because he was traveling the world and he was in Sokovia when the a battle happened with Ultron, and there's just that quick moment where she has a quick exchange with Stark, and it's so great. And they didn't have to put that in the movie, but they put it in the movie because it shows it enhances why the Sokovia Accords are necessary. And what's really interesting is. It bears very little resemblance to the Civil War storyline in the comics, but the central concern of it, because in the Civil War comics, as you remember, it's the New Warriors. They're chasing down villains by a school, and there's an explosion that kills a school bus full of kids, and 20 kids are killed, and that's what happens. But in the movies, it's like that Tony Stark created's rampaging around Sokovia, and they, as they say in Civil War, dropped a building on her son, and we dropped a building on her son. And it's very much, though, even though it's superheroics, these are things, they're analogous to 9/11, they're analogous to many other different things that happened in our world. So the situations involving everything that went on in Civil War were very much terrestrial concerns. Even though the movie's got superheroes in it that use their superpowers liberally, it's still a very earthbound set of problems that these characters are facing. The superheroics are not helping them solve the problem that Steve Rogers says we cannot have oversight. We can't have somebody tell us when or not we can get involved in a problem. we can't do that. And Tony Stark's like, well, we have to be able to do that.
But
And it's a very realistic. It's so funny because on this channel, people are like, Rob, I don't want to talk politics, but the Sokovia Accords in the Avengers movie and in Civil War are absolutely political. And I even when you're reading the comics, it would say, whose side are you on? And I'm Team Cap, but the fact is, the Avengers and Vision, the way Vision has a great scene. I totally forgot this scene existed in Civil War where he makes the point. He says, since you people came out into the world, since metahumans were now made public, there's been an exponential number of metahumans that are becoming available or that have been identified. And he says, and since then, the amount of events like Sokovia have also exponentially increased. So the appearance of all of these metahumans could very well be the cause. There's causality there, that with all the metahumans comes all these exponentially larger problems with the world. With would Loki even would Loki have ever looked at Midgard if Thor didn't come here? When the Chitauri forces attack in the first Avengers movie, which by the way is a Thanosian. We find out later that it was Thanos behind all that too. I mean, is that something that would have happened if the Avengers didn't exist, or not? And Civil War poses that question. So, in the case of Doomsday, you like you said, you have to establish Doom, which is an issue, and who is Doom and why does he look like Tony Stark? Does that even play into the storyline? And if it doesn't, does it matter? I mean, unless he never takes off his mask. If he just keeps his armor on, who cares if he looks like Robert Downey Jr.? But then why did you hire Robert Downey Jr. to play him if he doesn't take his mask off? But I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I can't, But
stop looking it over us.
I know, right? What I think is really interesting is we've seen examples in these 3 trailers and the 4th trailer. If the leak was when you see the Thing meeting M'Baku and you see Shuri and you see the tone that they're going for is this very grounded, emotional. It's the opposite of what Taika Waititi was doing in Love and Thunder.
Right.
And it's what I want. Like everything that I want from an Avengers movie or a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie seems to me what I'm going to be getting based on the 3 trailers that we've seen so far and the 4th one that dropped, I guess, this weekend.
Right. But let's go back to the issue of superhero movie versus a movie with superheroes in it. I think if Avengers Infinity War more Doomsday Endgame, right? And Secret Wars would be more akin to Endgame in the double punch of these 2 mega epic, spectacles with dozens and dozens of characters running around. So I understand everything that you've explained makes a lot of sense, and especially in terms of Civil War. If we jump from Civil War to Infinity War, we jump from war to war. Infinity War clearly has a situation that's inherently more fantastical. An agreement there. Civil War.
Yeah.
Civil War, it's mostly formed around classic moral conflict.
An earthbound human moral conflict that has absolutely nothing to do. The conflict itself has nothing necessarily to do with superpowers. It's about oversight. It's about vigilantism. Can these metahumans and Thunderbolt Ross makes the great comment, do you know where Thor and Banner are? If I'd lost 2 30-kiloton nukes, I'd be a little worried myself. And you can't argue with that. And we as an audience are like, okay, he's referring to Thor and Hulk as nuclear weapons, but that's not a wrong way to think about it. And the Avengers don't know where they've gone. So that's terrifying.
And by the way, even though Avengers Age of Ultron was, not nearly as well received and didn't have as great an ROI as the other 2 Avengers, or as the first Avengers, and then, Captain America Civil War, which is informally kind of the Avengers, like you were saying. There's also a moral, earthbound moral issue at the heart of Captain America Age of Ultron. But where I
No,
was going,
Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Avengers: Age of Ultron, sorry. But where I was going with Infinity War is that while Infinity War is inherently more fantastical and does have, you know, non-human threat, et cetera, et cetera. Part of the magic trick is that by the time you get to that film, the 19th film in the MCU, it still feels to some degree like it is, you know, Earth plausible or part of that mainline reality that you've been seeing in all of the previous movies. And so I think that part of how they accomplished that was all of the work that they did between Civil War. So between the 13th and the 19th film, they had 6 films to help you to basically go through a gradual learning curve and a gradual acceptance of a little bit larger threat, a little bit larger threat, more and more cosmic, more and more cosmic. And that helps you. I don't know that with Avengers Doomsday, per your comment, being more inherently fantastic, we haven't had those 6 films to help us get us there. So even if the tone is more restrained, which is a great thing, I'm not sure if that's going to be enough personally.
Well, now let me ask you this. Doesn't the fact that Steve Rogers is coming back, doesn't the fact that the X-Men are coming back, there's a direct connection to all of these other films. So baked into Doomsday is going to be the fact that we have all these other movies. That Steve Rogers suddenly Avenger. Like I was joking for the last year, we don't even know who are in the Avengers. You know, from the end of Thunderbolts, all we know is that that Sam Wilson is suing the new Avengers for the name.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't even know who the Avengers are, other than the fact that you've got Sam Wilson and Falcon that have been working together, but you don't know anything about like where Doctor Strange go at the end of Multiverse of Madness. He's gone. Or is he? He's gone. You know, we don't know where he's gone. And Steve Rogers, we know Steve Rogers has been somewhere, you know, back in time. Maybe. You know, you don't know where he's been. Not really. You know, he shows up. He doesn't tell Sam Wilson he has a fucking shield. You know, when he comes back at the end of Endgame, he disappears, and then when he comes back, he's an old man. He could be anywhere. He could have gone anywhere. He could do anything. You just don't know. But by bringing him back as the Steve Rogers we know as a young man, and you've seen in the trailer, he's back at Agent Carter's house. We know at least he went back to the end of it. It begins where Steve Rogers was at Endgame.
Yeah.
Because it shows us that he's there and that he has a kid there. So they've been there for at least, you know, he's been at least for 9 months, you know, at least, maybe more, you know.
Sure. And again, by the logic of some of the previous comments that I've made, like when I was talking about, you know, Spider-Man No Way Home, etc., that is true. If you bring in these characters that are beloved and that the audience has a strong emotional relationship with, like Steve Rogers, you're absolutely getting an injection of you know, of warmth, of something, emotional heft, emotional import into the film. But the thing that's a little bit nuanced about this is that some of these characters, part of the thing that was so satisfying is that they had a beautiful elegiac send-off, and you are undoing that send-off. So while you're benefiting from the emotional association, you are also now undoing work that you're going to have to redo or justify the undoing of. And that could be tricky. Does it serve the needs of the story? People are going to, you know, I think that people are going to be asking in the back of their minds, is the plot of this movie a contrivance to get these characters back to make me feel a certain way? Or does this seem to arise organically from all of the things that have happened before? And how convincing the answer is, if it's the latter, I think is going to be very closely related to the success of the film. Get one more comment real quick, and we should probably check super chats. But
yeah, we got some super chats to read.
The thing that I would also say in terms of the success of this film is I don't think that, in, you know, looking at that ratio of earnings, worldwide earnings to production budget, I don't think that this film is going to hit the highs of Infinity War or Endgame. Both of those were at around 6.8 factor. And I'm not sure, because of the huge budget, at least that has been reported for Doomsday, that it's going to be able to hit that. Now, what I would say is if you do the math for every single MCU, for all 37 MCU movies that we have, it's averaging at about a 4.3, I believe. And I do think that it could hit a 4.3, which again would certainly be encouraging given the fact that we've been at around 2.9 in the last phase. So
Now, let me ask you this, and this is something that recently occurred to me. So, one of my favorite superhero movies of all time is X-Men Days of Future Past.
oh, interesting. Okay.
I love X-Men Days of Future Past. Love it. Because I love the X-Men characters. And to be fair, a friend of mine obviously Brian Singer directed the first two X-Men movies, and I go all the way back to USC and the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. And Dave Parker and I did the special features for X-Men 1.5 and X2. I'm a huge X-Men fan. I had nothing to do with Days of Future Past, but I loved it. Right. In Days of Future Past, the TVA. Now we know the TVA had to have that was a film where there was time travel shenanigans, there was timeline changes. Dark Phoenix was brought back from the dead along with Cyclops for that ending.
Yes.
Now, I don't know from what I remember. I mean, I don't think that the TVA. I don't know how they retcon that. I have no idea how I really don't have any idea how by bringing back Cyclops, you acknowledge that he is alive, just like at the end of Days of Future Past. So I guess the interesting thing is you'd have to assume then that in Days of Future Past there was no other branch created, that time unfolded as it was always supposed to. So that's why the TVA, I mean, you have to assume this because the TVA did not come in and prune. We see Kelsey Grammer as Beast at the end of Days of Future Past. You see Kelsey Grammer as Beast in the Marvels. And by I don't even know if to be honest, I don't even know if they've thought this through or thought about it at all. Because I'm I'm contemplating there is no TVA. And then, the fact that the Wolverine at the end of Days of Future Past is not our Wolverine. Right. I mean, it's not Wolverine of the MCU.
First, correct.
Yeah, it's not MCU's Wolverine because he died in Logan, I think. That's what we're led to believe. Yeah, that's what we're led to believe. So there's another crazy. I don't know how deep they're going to get into that in the movie, but I think about it whenever I see these X-Men characters. I'm like, so which version of these X-Men? And somebody said that maybe they're supposed to be the X-Men 97, the animated version of the X-Team, but I don't think so because they've already played with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. So it has to be somewhere. It has to come. I don't know. But anyway, let's look at seeing what you guys are saying. A couple of super chats here have come in. Yes. Actually, a lot of really interesting comments. First of all, Laserbeam Hawkins has been a member of the channel for 22 months. Thank you for that. We had a great member call this weekend. People that are members of the channel, we have theoretically every 2 weeks, we have a great member call. Ours lasted 4 hours. We were on from 11 to 3 o'clock, a little after 3, actually almost 3:30. It was great fun. Darth Plato says, "Hey, Rob, in my humble opinion, you should watch Academy. This is Starfleet Academy. Should I go? I've been invited to go to a screening tomorrow of Starfleet Academy. Should I go?" I put up a poll. The yeses are now at 60%. The poll is pinned to the top of the chat. You can lean in. So, why should you go to the screening? Because someone has to take the hits. And as our Duke of Dope Discourse, you ought to be the one to draw the line against the nonsense. Come on, Rob, take one for the team. Okay, but what about my sanity? Royston Bailey says, Disney forgot they're supposed to tell more stories, not just produce more films. Where's their competitive spirit? Don't they want to win back number one? Well, Disney has the two movies that made over $1 billion this year was Zootopia and Avatar, so they're doing okay. But I think they make money when they make movies that people go see. That's it. I mean, that's the only indicator of success in Hollywood at the end of the day is, do your movies make money? And I think they do want to make money. And I don't even know, I would kill to see what the budget of Doomsday is. I would love to see a line item budget, because I am sure that it's the most expensive movie ever made, even adjusted for inflation. Sure. I mean, when I say that, I don't know that for a fact, but I would imagine it is. Darth Plato goes on, to all of the Doctor Who fans out there, the Outcasts Creative did a retrospective on classic Doctor Who. The panelists made up of Lance Nielsen, Inside Man, and yours truly. Question, Rob. Does the concept of Time Lords make more sense than the TVA? Oh, this is a great question. Okay, Alvaro, I'll throw this one to you. Are the Time Lords of Gallifrey, as depicted in Doctor Who, are they more or less believable than the TVA in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? What say you, sir?
I don't consistently watch Doctor Who. I've barely watched any Doctor Who. And I think that it's very difficult to assess if something is more believable or not outside of the context of the stories in which it lives. So I defer that question back to you.
Okay, well, I would say I believe in the Time Lords of Gallifrey more than I believe in the TVA, if only because the Time Lords of Gallifrey have their own planet, their own history, and it's not based on anything necessarily earthbound. Mm-hmm. It's actually a legitimate effort to create, and look, they've been making Doctor Who since the early 60s. Right. And while I think, Russell Davies and the Timeless Children came on and they retconned fuck all that. I don't believe that shit. I think Doctor Who is far more believable than the TVA, only because the TVA's its very inception is supposed to be a parody of of an earthbound bureaucracy. Right. It's like being at the DMV, which I thought was a silly way to go. I mean, the TVA, and by the way, they were emulating something. The TVA is in Marvel Comics. They didn't just make it up for the MCU. I think that's when the MCU broke, when they added the TVA, and they did it in the Loki TV series. It wasn't even done, in a movie, and then it spilled over, and I don't think it particularly worked very well. But it's an interesting question. I wonder what the viewers would say. Carnal. Oh, go ahead, man. Sorry.
No, just real quick. One of the things we briefly mentioned as well was that there was in a way, there's a similarity for people who are interested in the TVA. They should check out Isaac Asimov's The End of Eternity, because there is a group that exists outside of normal time that sends agents into human history to make what they call reality changes for the maximum good of humanity. And in a way, those Eternals, which are not the MCU Eternals, are a little bit similar.
Yeah, but those are believable.
Those are believable, and they're developed in a more well-considered way.
Yeah. Carnal, I think it's Carnal. CARN3L, like 7. I'm going to say Carnal. That's cool. Carnal says, I recall that Kevin Feige intentionally made Phase 4 without any connectivity, like the previous phases. He was also on record seeking to move away from the phases, and unfortunately fans didn't receive the memo. Well, but they kept going on and calling it phases. I think here's what I don't understand. I don't understand the Marvel Cinematic Universe, rightly or wrongly. And I want to say this. I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's kind of like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still pretty good because it's pizza. And I like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I really do. And I do find something like I love the Eternals. I don't think it's a particularly good MCU movie. It might have made a great standalone science fiction film, but I don't think it works in the MCU. But I still love it. And, of course, Gemma Chan, just saying. I love Shang-Chi. I do. I love that as a standalone movie, I really enjoyed it. It felt like if it was not part of the MCU, I think it would have worked perfectly well and if it was all done in Korean or Chinese or Japanese, so much the better. And I liked No Way Home, and Multiverse of Madness was hit and miss, but I enjoyed watching it. I still enjoy watching these movies. I do not enjoy watching Quantumania, and I do not enjoy watching Love and Thunder. I hate those movies. As a matter of fact, those are the only Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and I would say to a certain extent the Marvels, only because I just hate all the storytelling choices in that movie. Really dislike that. So those three movies, I'm like, I can't believe those movies even got made. And it has nothing to do with identity politics, and it has nothing to do. It's just it feels like you had said yesterday. You put it very aptly. You said it feels like somebody set out to make a superhero movie, as opposed to the MCU had. The MCU used to give us great movies that happened to have superheroes in them, but they were telling stories that were very grounded. And I like to say we love those movies because we believe those characters. I believe that Tony Stark was a real guy.
Yeah.
And you see scenes in Civil War where Spider-Man is introduced to. Civil War not only has a sprawling storyline, but it introduces both Black Panther and Spider-Man into the cinematic universe of the MCU, and you love them. And by the way, Doomsday is being introduced as a character in the MCU by the Russo brothers in Doomsday. And if you look at the screen time of Spider-Man and you look at the screen time in Black Panther in those, and you combine that into one character, if they pull that off with Doomsday, it could work. If you look at Civil War as a template with all the characters and all the stuff going on, and that's why I'm like, the Russo brothers are 4 for 4. Now, I haven't liked anything nearly as much as they've made after their work in the MCU.
Right.
Like, I mean, Electric State, $300 million, The Gray Man. Come on, guys. Everything that they did in Civil War, like Civil War is a great piece of work. It's a great movie. And it works. There's so much to love. And if you don't like what's going on right in front of you, give it 5 minutes and you'll be somewhere completely different, and they'll give you, there's so much in that movie that's delicious and fun. So anyway.
Yeah, one thing that we haven't mentioned, which I think relates to the comment or the super chat that you just read, is that, not only were the films much less connected starting with Phase 4, but that was also the introduction of the television series. With WandaVision kicking off in 2021, the same year that Black Widow was released, we're still suffering from the after effects or not completely out of the pandemic and all of those different issues. And so I think that, having all of these different hours of content on the small screen competing with the feature films diluted both of them. We haven't really talked about that, but I think it's certainly one of the reasons.
Oh, it destroyed the MCU.
Yeah.
Because you have the most profitable and successful feature film franchise in history. Feature film franchise suddenly had those very same characters being moved over to the small screen, which, I mean, look, I love TV and all that, but it diminished those characters.
Well, and the series weren't as good, just inherently. That's the other issue. If each of those shows had been excellent, it could have, diluted it, but still mostly left it with full, integrity.
No, and look, I mean, I enjoyed the Loki shows, I guess, because I love Tom Hiddleston playing Loki, but do you
own the Loki shows? Have you bought those on disc? So you didn't enjoy them that much.
I know.
Just saying.
I know. I mean, I never thought, I have not bought one Disney Plus series on, like, Moon Knight is one of my favorite Marvel characters.
Great character, yeah.
And when I started reading comics again in the early 80s, there were 3 Marvel comic books that were direct sale only. There was Khazar, Micronauts, and Moon Knight.
Right.
And Moon Knight became direct sale, I want to say issue 17. I'm probably misremembering it, but I fucking loved the first 38 issue Moon Knight series because it was Batman, but it was also romantic. It was romantic and noir. And if I had made a Moon Knight movie, I would have told his origin and I would have dealt with Moon Knight 25. But I understand they went into the schizophrenic Moon Knight that is a product like Secret Wars of the aughts.
Right.
It was something, and they did a great job with that. But the thing is, I liked Moon Knight when he had 3 identities, Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and Mark Spector, and Moon Knight. I liked that whole business, and Khonshu was not yet like a player like the Egyptian god Khonshu. The fact that they even had him in that show where he's eating people's souls and fighting other Egyptian gods over the Great Pyramids of Giza. I'm like, what the fuck is this bullshit? Where's Moon Knight? I hated it.
And
Hated it. And I was so excited.
When they announced the casting for that, I mean, we found out Oscar Isaac was going to be Moon Knight. We found out Ethan Hawke was going to be in this, all of these different people. And
all of it, everything about it was great. The costume, Moon Knight's, look, the one thing I will say about, and I love, the costume design is a marvel. Every single costume that they've ever given us in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it is both redolent of the comic books, but it's also great unto itself. That costume that Captain America is wearing as he's part of fighting in World War II, it was recognizably Captain America, but it also was a great paramilitary functional suit. He looked amazing. They give you the USO tour Captain America and show you how it's goofy, but then they give you that incredible suit that he's wearing for the rest of the film. And then by the time you get out of that and you see like the suit that he's wearing in Civil War and then the suit he's wearing in Endgame, amazing. And then the original Avengers Captain America suit, incredible too. Incredible. They've done such a great job, and the Moon Knight costume was no exception. That costume was beautiful. Mm-hmm. It harked back to the reboot of Moon Knight 1 where it was much more Egyptian, but it's still dope. Anyway, Darth Plato goes, I wanted to point out, Rob, that Major Chai Chai is now the official aide-de-camp of the channel. Offer congrats to your new ADC, Rob. Well, I have no problem. Darth Plato, you're the official philosopher of the channel. I guess Major Chai Chai is now my official aide-de-camp. Or maybe she doesn't want to be my aide-de-camp. She's just the channel's aide-de-camp, and that the channel itself is her boss. Is it aide-de-camp or aide-de-champ? Is it like a French word I'm mispronouncing?
It's aide-de-camp.
It's aide-de-camp. Aide-de-camp. Okay. Darth Plato says the best Marvel series is Agent Carter. I liked Agent Carter, but it wasn't really a Marvel series. It was more of an ABC. But yeah, I mean, TV. Marco Esquindoles says Loki will play a big part in Doomsday and going forward. No? Does he? Does Loki play a big part in Doomsday? What do you think, Alvaro? Does he?
It'll be interesting to find out.
I mean, he is carrying the multiverse in his hands, really. So hopefully he'll stick around for a while. One never knows. You never know. Loki is a mover and shaker. And maybe you'll find out that he even has his own moving company. But I'll leave that there. Make of that what you will. Fearless Wolf sends in a $26.82 super chat because it's translated for something. Thank you very much. It's very nice of you. Robin Alvaro, do you think you're over-analyzing the MCU a bit? This feels less like a deep intent and more like too many cooks telling the same story. When everyone pushes their own take, it clashes with earlier films. That's actually a really good question. And we talked about that last night, about how it seemed to me that Marvel worked best when Kevin Feige would hire a director that had proven themselves, Kenneth Branagh, even James Gunn. He hadn't worked in a $175 million budget range, but he had made things like Slither, which is a crazy multi-toned horror alien thriller, and Super, even though they both were like $3 million movies. He proved he could, and he'd written many studio movies as well. But he proved that he could work within the Marvel framework because they have an apparatus, that makes these movies where they design action sequences and the look of things. But James Gunn comes in and makes something uniquely his own. I don't think anyone would have made Guardians the way he made it. And I know that Nicole, she wrote part of that script too. I don't want to poo-poo her and say that she didn't play a part. She did, obviously. But I mean, Kenneth Branagh, Royal Shakespeare Company. The guy directed Cinderella. He got me interested in a live-action remake of a Disney animated film about a Disney princess. And he also directed Henry V and played Henry V in his first feature, We Few, We Happy Few, We Band of Brothers, the St. Crispin's Day speech. That shit was dope. And getting him to direct Thor, I thought that was a stroke of genius.
Yeah. No, and I think that this ties back to the issue of tone that we were talking about. I don't necessarily think that it has to do with how many people are involved. It's a question of whether the the direction that they are laboring under, whether it's from Kevin Feige or whoever it is that they're reporting to, is if they're getting good specific direction on tone, that is going to help to make those films more successful or less successful as part of a cohesive whole. So, I think that I also think that there's an issue of perhaps when filmmakers come into something like the MCU and they're going to make, movie 29 or movie 34 or something like that. There's probably a sense that you just don't want to redo something that has been done, and many more things have been done than the people who came in and made movie 5 or movie 8. And so, there's a fear that the audience is going to become desensitized, so that if you do the same thing as well, it feels like less, even though it's not. And, I think part of what we've seen, for example, the Marvels is to me a really prominent version of this. There's such an attempt to manipulate tone in a way that is new. It doesn't work, and it's going out of its way. It's going so far out of its way to be original and quirky and memorable that it actually becomes forgettable in a way.
Yep. I was the Marvels was bewildering to me. And you have Nick Fury in it, and it's just
you have cats eating. I mean,
the Flurkins. I mean, there's not just one Flurkin. There's a whole space station full of Flurkins. I mean, it was. The thing is, I loved Monica Rambeau as portrayed in WandaVision. Like, I really did like WandaVision a lot. The end of WandaVision kind of went off the rails, but I really liked WandaVision a lot, and I really liked that character. I thought she was a great addition to the movie. And when she wakes up, I don't know if it was WandaVision first or was it Black Widow first, where we see somebody coming back from the snap. And when Monica Rambeau wakes up, and she comes, I fucking loved that. Like she'd been gone for 5 years and doesn't know it. She just wakes up.
I believe that was WandaVision.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, they did a great job of it in Black Widow too when Yelena comes back.
Right.
I mean, and that's another. Okay, this is just an aside, but here's something I think that which in a way I kind of feel bad for the people of the MCU Earth. So they already had to deal with the 5 years of Thanos' disappearance and coming back from that, and half the planet, half the beings, half the animals. What about those poor animals? They're like, wait a minute, we left and it was summer. Now it's winter. What happened? But the Earth, the people of Earth, it hasn't been very long since Thanos snapped, or that Tony Stark brought humanity back, that brought back half the universe, and then they have to deal with what happens in Doomsday. And if you go by what is happening in Secret Wars, that's not going to be fun for the people of Earth. But, Marvel, and that's another thing that I think that and I'm not saying Marvel should have made a Marvel, like the Marvels series that was told from the perspective of the reporter.
Yep.
They should have made a Marvels movie where they did it from the point of view of a reporter who is going back and dealing with what is the aftermath of Thanos' snap. And you could have dealt with what is the religion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? How did the religions of the world deal with Thanos? When you now know that there are gods or mad titans or there's I mean, Arishem the Judge, a gigantic celestial, is at the end of the Eternals going, I will be back to judge humanity. We've already been fucked by Thanos for 5 years, and now there's some gigantic thing that's 3 times the size of the Earth in the sky telling us that he's coming back to judge us. Never heard from again. Never dealt with again. And it's not dealt with in Doomsday either. So, which is a bummer. So this is interesting. Marco Esquindola has gifted 10 memberships to the channel. I want to thank you, Marco. That's very nice. And again, we're going to have another member call. I love our member calls, but it's always the same bunch of friends. I like seeing when new people drop in. So if you've got a membership, we usually do these calls on Saturday mornings starting at 11 Pacific time, and they last for however long people are there. Usually I try and stay as long as I can. Everybody gets 7 minutes. You can ask me anything you want. As Roberto always jokes, it's 7 minutes in heaven with Rob, but there's no closet involved. So, Carnal says, RDJ, thank you for $20 super chat. It's very nice of you. RDJ says RDJ is not masked for the majority of screen time is a big hang up for me. I know it's contractual provision, but the intrigue and intimation factor or imitation or in factor stems from Doom. Predominantly, he does not reveal who's under the mask. Thoughts? Why do you think that Doom is unmasked for most of the movie? Why do you think that? I'm just saying that perhaps might be a wrong assumption on your part. That's all I'm saying. I'm just going to let that out there. So I would say Doom, Dr. Doom, Victor Von Doom probably has his mask on a surprising amount of time in the movie. You might be surprised. I'm just assuming, maybe. But Royston Bailey says, I'm trying to squeeze the last of this lemon juice, the last of the lemon juice. I don't know what that means. Do you mean that, is that a euphemism? Secular Monk says, you should go see Academy. We need to see if it's peak verisimilitude or your rant after seeing it. Either will be fun. Happy birthday, Rob. Oh, thanks for bringing back that joke. That joke just disappeared. Alvaro, I am older. I'm older than you. I'm not in the greatest. I mean, I feel great. I don't have any aches and pains. I don't have any creaks. I feel good. I get up every morning and bound out of bed. I feel terrific. But that's when those Widowmaker heart attacks can hit you. And I think if I'm going to have a Widowmaker heart attack, it's probably going to be sitting in a movie theater in the Sunset 5, which represents great independent cinema, where I met David Cronenberg after a special screening of Crash back in 96, 30 years ago. I could see myself I would get so apoplectic, I would have a myocardial infarction and keel over dead. However, I could come up with a great rant, which also could make me pass away. You never know. So I'll be thinking about it. Grinning Wombat says, could the X-Men we see in Doomsday be the same group that gets wiped out in Deadpool and Wolverine? It would tie in really well. Well, if they get wiped out in Deadpool and Wolverine, that means they survive Doomsday. And if Doomsday leads into Secret Wars, how would that work? Well, I guess it would work because it's the end of time. Or not? Like, does the void exist at the end of time after Doomsday? I don't know. I don't know that. What do you think?
I don't know that they've thought about that, quite honestly.
Right.
That's the feeling that I have.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I mean, maybe something happens to the TVA in Doomsday. I don't know if it's definitive, but maybe something will happen. I don't know. WraithX7 says the MCU made the same mistake as the comics by giving Moon Knight multiple personality disorder, which was not originally part of that character. Totally. That should have been a storyline, not a character trait. It should have been a storyline that could have been resolved. I totally agree. Marco Esquindola says, I've gifted 50 memberships over the last few days. You have? How have I missed this? Wow. Probably because last night I was really drunk. So I apologize, Marco. That's very nice of you. Thank you very much. I hope everybody comes to those. That's very kind of you to do that. And Marco Esquindola is such a cool name. Floating Kites says a good 70% of Doom's aura comes from the mask, to be honest. I agree. Diamond G says Doom's aura is his arrogance and pettiness. But they also have to make him a believable, I think do you think that's true, Alvaro, as a comic fan? Do you think that Doom's appeal comes from his arrogance and pettiness?
I think to an extent it does, but I think it also comes from his scientific prowess and his genius. I mean, as is pretty well documented, there's a fine line between Iron Man and Doomsday, right? I mean, regardless of the acting and the casting choice, if you think about the origins of those characters in some of the earlier comic books, it's the ability to engineer and super inventive, powerful, amazing things. I mean, it's almost like creating technologies that seem to be magical, essentially, like Clark's Law. And I do think that the arrogance is part of the appeal of the character. I think one of the challenges in Doomsday is going to be having the character of Doom be threatening enough, be enough of a menace, or even if it's not directly a menace, somehow tied to whatever the menace is, and simultaneously, having that arrogance. Because the one of the things about Thanos is that we never really saw Thanos lose his temper throughout, building all the way to Infinity War and Endgame. He was pretty calm and collected, and the driver of his master plan, while we did learn that there was an emotional, backstory to it, was at least initially presented from a more philosophical perspective, resources of the universe, and resource limitations, and all of these things. So it'll be very interesting to see how they handle that balance with Doomsday, because I personally think that if Doomsday is shown to be motivated too overtly by things that are,
You mean Doomsday the movie itself? You mean?
Yes, if the character of Doom in Doomsday is, if the main motivation that we get turns out to be, let's just say, less philosophical than the one that Thanos had, it's going to be difficult to at the same time believe that he's as much of a threat. Because if he's that upset by things that are small scale, how is he able to outsmart things that are such large scale? I mean, that's something to think about.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that, as a villain, that Doom needs a deeply personal motivation to do what he does? Or can grand schemes alone be enough to motivate his character? Like, I want to remake the universe in my visage, whatever that is. Or does he need something deeply personal as well? Maybe he has both.
Right. Ideally, it's a combination. I don't think it's an either or proposition.
That's probably a good bet. We've had some, let's see, a couple other. Homie Joe, 1989, says, does Captain America having Mjolnir at the end of the Endgame have anything to do with Doomsday? Well, I think other than the fact that, him having Mjolnir just proves what what Thor suspected, is that he's pure of heart. That was the what I loved about that. They set that up in Avengers Age of Ultron, when he's almost able, and you see these are another thing. These movies used to be so good. And that scene, the whole party scene in Avengers Tower, when they're sitting around and, Tony Stark, they build up, he uses his repulsors to try and lift. And when Captain America makes the hammer move and they cut to Thor and he's like, wait, what? And then they set that up, and it's a great moment when he can't do it. And Thor's like, but there was that moment you see Thor going, for a moment, he thought he wasn't the only one. Yep. And you saw that in his face, and they did it so well. And when you see it paid off in Endgame, when you see the thing, I get chills thinking about it. As a lifelong imagination connoisseur who's been reading comics since I was a little kid and still do, it was so gratifying to see Captain America wield Mjolnir and then spin it like Thor does, because he's watched Thor. And when he caught it and he does that thing and he snaps back into position, and Thor's like, I knew it. That is why people love the MCU. And you know what? The Russo brothers, they're the masters of that. They set up the on your left in the beginning of Winter Soldier, and they pay it off in the end of Endgame. And that's why I think the premise of this show is, I think Marvel realizes what they did. For whatever reason, blame people all you want. The movies are still making money. They're not huge cash cows the way they used to be. I think Avengers Doomsday is going to make all the money. I think that people are going to go and see it, and they're not going to believe what they're witnessing. They're not going to believe, because It has to be that way. If it's not that way, they spend so. This is, to me, you know what I love about this movie? This movie might very well be, people would say, oh, Titanic. Never bet against Jimmy C. They bet against Jimmy C. You don't bet against Jimmy C. Titanic, everyone poo-pooed it. There was all kinds of crazy, this movie's going to be terrible. A lot of people, Paramount and Fox, co-production. And look what happened. This movie, no one's really poo-pooing it except we fans. Only YouTube pundits are poo-pooing it, really. But the movie has to succeed. Never in the history of cinema has a movie had to succeed, I think, more than Doomsday. Do you think I'm wrong? Is that hyperbole? Am I being overly hyperbolic about that?
Superman had a lot of pressure on it, I would say. Maybe not as much, but there was a lot of pressure on James Gunn.
But it was a lot of pressure on James Gunn. But the thing about James Gunn is, his 3 Marvel movies all kind of made, they each made 750 up to 850 million. And yeah, of course, Suicide Squad was a bit of a stumble, the Suicide Squad, but it was still, I loved the Suicide Squad. Right. I never thought I'd see Starro in live action in my entire life. I couldn't believe I fucking saw Starro. I'm like, oh my God. But this movie, I mean, that's why I can't imagine seeing the budget of this film. I would love to just see it. Just, if only I saw a top sheet budget, where a top sheet is a breakdown. It's all the major expenditures from all the different, and then you get the final number, as opposed to the giant itemized budget. I would just love to see the top sheet, not for any other reason than from a production, as a producer of films myself, I just would love to know how much money they spent on this movie. I just would love to know. We have some more. Let's see. Six Scale Mafia says, love you, bro. This is Doom's world. We're all just living in it. All hail Doom. I love that. I love that, Anthony. Castle Grace Skull says, Moon Knight plus Scarlet Scarab avatars. Baby Avatar. Don't get me started. Don't tell me you love that show. Although I won't begrudge you if you do. Diamond G says, actually, I think it's how much Doom hates Reed. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be the case in this movie. I would like to believe that the Fantastic Four, I don't think they hate Doom. I think they kind of pity him. They're like, why'd you go that way, dude? Why'd you got to be that way? I would think that there's a grudging. I think the Fantastic Four will always have love for Doctor Doom. What about you? Love as a family member that went astray.
I think that it's really situational based on the story. I mean, you can play it either way. I don't think that that's a fixed star in the Fantastic Four or Doom stories. But
Castle Grayskull also gets a little spicy, asking, will Namor go after Sue, Reed, or Storm? Well, okay, I don't know. Storm, you mean Sue? Sue, Reed, or Storm? You mean Storm like Storm from the X-Men Storm? Namor go after Sue, Reed, or Storm, because you don't have punctuation there. But I don't know. I think Namor is, he's a very handsome guy with a lot of interesting powers. But I don't know. I don't know if there's enough time for romance in this movie. We'll have to wait and see. Now, finally, I have to ask, I guess, the final question, Alvaro. We're now at the 2-hour mark in this great conversation. Do you think the premise of this show is, can Doom for the Avengers bring salvation to the MCU? This was your title or your heading. I want you to answer the question. Do you think so? Do you think that Avengers Doomsday, the single film that it is, and maybe we can I'll grant you leading into Secret Wars, I've heard, I really did believe that they were going to break Doom into 2 movies. I still kind of believe that because it's a lot of movie. I've also heard that they were going to break Secret Wars into 2 movies. I've heard that they were going to do that's a distinct possibility. I never heard that they were going to break Doomsday into 1 movie or into 2 movies. I just thought they might because they could, because of that picture the Russo brothers put up. But do you think that Avengers Doomsday is going to restore the luster to the MCU, and if so, why?
I don't think that it can. I think that it can show us salvation. I think that it can give us a sense of the direction that we need to continue to take to get back to the grandeur and the splendor of the MCU in its heyday. But I don't think that 3 hours, no matter how good they are, can accomplish what you're saying.
What if they're Lawrence of Arabia? What if it's Lawrence of Arabia, Abel Gantz's Napoleon, and The Right Stuff? Good. All movies that are longer than 3 hours.
Sure. Those are good, but they're not graded on a curve necessarily of belonging to an IP and a long-running franchise. So it's apples to oranges.
Okay, is that your final answer?
I think that it is. You know, I think it can show us what the MCU could become, but it can't deliver it in a single blow.
I disagree. I think that on December 18th of 2026, if they keep Doomsday happening,
Yeah.
so we're going to get Dune 3 and Avengers Doomsday, we are going to be getting, in my estimation, two of the greatest science fiction fantasy films ever. Like, I love Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies. I don't think they're perfect. They're more like the tone poem version of Dune, but I love them. But I do think that Doomsday is going to be one of the great cinematic experiences, not just of 2026, but ever. Ever. I think that. You don't seem convinced. You seem nonplussed.
No, I mean it certainly has the potential to be that, but you know, listen. In terms of the Dune part of it, I'm with you. I think that if Dune 3 delivers on a level that's equal to Dune 2, it'll be the single greatest science fiction trilogy of all time. Now, again, I do think that it's difficult to compare a science fiction trilogy with, you know, Tarkovsky or whatever, you know,
Sure.
cinephile things you want to bring in. It's apples and oranges, different functions, different, you know, audiences, etc. But I mean, I certainly would say in terms of blockbuster appeal, in terms of populist entertainment, it could be a very memorable day. I don't doubt that at all.
All I can say to conclude this conversation is 3 months ago, I would have thought that Doomsday is a desperate attempt by Disney, Marvel, Kevin Feige, everybody involved. Robert Downey Jr. knew he could probably get the biggest paycheck anyone's ever received to make a movie ever in the history of Hollywood. I would have said it seemed like a desperate, gimmicky attempt to bring luster back to a tarnished brand. Now, I have come around 180 degrees, and I'm going off in the opposite direction, saying that what we are going to get with Avengers Doomsday is like what Channing Tatum said in a red carpet interview. He said, "No one is ready. It's brain-meltingly craziness." Now, you never know. You never know. You never know how a movie's actually going to turn out. But I will say this. I do not remember a time, not lately, where I've known as much as I've known about a movie and have been as excited to see a finished film than I am to see Avengers Doomsday. I will say that. And it is going to put a lot of smiles on a lot of faces, and I'm probably going to see it 4 times opening weekend. And I hope it's 3.5 fucking hours long, because I'm sure that they're going to have a problem getting it even to that length. And by the way, I've not been in the edit bay. I haven't seen it. I know nothing about the finished film at all, but I'm just saying. I mean, I do know some things, but enough. But I am deliriously excited for Avengers Doomsday. And again, the Russo brothers haven't missed. And go back, I mean, I would suggest doing the same thing. Go back and watch both Winter Soldier and Civil War. and watch how intricately constructed, especially Civil War is, because that movie does a lot of things.
Yeah, it does.
And it does it really, really well. And imagine that cranked up to 11, as Spinal Tap might say. So Darth Plato says no, because I can't unsee what I've seen up till now. Darth Plato says Rob and Alvaro disagree. Thunderdome, dying times here. I do like Dr. Dealgood in Beyond Thunderdome. Dice are rolling. That's a great line, by the way. So, okay, Alvaro, this has been a great show tonight. A great way to end my Sunday. I want you to tell the folks at home, tell us about your Substack, and tell us about your book and everything else you do.
Yeah, I enjoyed this conversation greatly. I write fiction, I write reviews. I have a Substack, which is called The Gulf of Selves. Even if just one or two of the people watching decide to type that into Google and subscribe, you'll get a free article every 2 weeks with commentary on recent films, books, lots of things that pertain to pop culture. So really appreciate anyone who might want to give it a gander and possibly subscribe. And then my book, Equimedian, as you mentioned, Rob, available now from the finest online sellers. I would say it's a science fiction novel, and we live in a very addictive, complicated age, and those are some of the themes that Equimedian deals with indirectly.
It's really interesting that I have friends that, you got Max Allan Collins, who wrote The Return of the Maltese Falcon, which you can get now, and you, Equimedian. Let me just ask you quickly, from the time you decided or you contemplated writing this novel, maybe the kernel of the idea, could you take us just quickly through that journey? From the time you came up with the idea, where do you get your ideas, everybody? From the time you started playing with this notion of writing this novel, and you'd already published short stories and things, how long was that journey for you?
It was a number of years. I mean, I had the idea. The idea was to write a science fiction novel of the style of books that were popular in the 1970s, almost as though the book itself were an artifact of that time. So, as a big fan of Philip K. Dick and other authors like that who played with reality-bending concepts, I thought it would be fun to write a book in that style and to feature a character who's actually very aware of science fiction, was living in the 1970s in a different reality. That was the kernel of the idea. It came fairly quickly. And then the process, like I said, was a little bit long because I wrote several different versions of it. And, each iteration helped me to get closer to what the book ultimately became. And then, took a little bit of time to work with an agent to find a publisher who was interested in it. So a number of years. I don't remember exactly, maybe 3 years, something like that.
Interesting. It's one of those things I've always wanted to write a book, and I've never had the stones, and I've never attempted to do so. It's the one thing in my life I have yet to accomplish that I really wanted to accomplish. So creatively. So I look at you and I look at Max as gods amongst men. I also want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for writing this wonderful letter. It was great to hear this. It was very funny. I friended somebody on Facebook today. I didn't know who they were, and all they wrote me a message and said, "You are a liar." And I got that, and I was like, I mean, I try not to lie because lying, it never ends well, and I'm not a very good liar. But I was curious. I'm like, well, what did I lie about? I haven't. Let's see if I had no answer. But so getting it, you live in this world. It's a crazy place. Can people find you? Your Substack. You know what? I didn't post your Substack or the link to the show, which I'm going to go do now, so the people that catch up on the show later can find your Substack and tell to us one more time your Substack.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called The Gulf of Selves, and you can just type in Alvaro Zainas Amaro Substack, and it'll take you there. It's the only one with that name.
Nice. Well, I would imagine The Gulf of Selves is it's as cool as your book.
No, I meant with my name.
Oh, well, there you go. So how many people are named Alvaro Zainas Amaro in the world? By the way, you said something to me the other day that I want you to share.
Uh-oh.
About what you got in the mail. And we were we were contemplating. You got 2 pieces of physical media on the same day.
Oh, right.
And it was so funny because we have a planet of almost 8 billion people, but you got a combination of things in the mail, and we were postulating, or we were pontificating about the fact that in that moment, no one of all those 8 billion myriad people of all kinds of backgrounds, no one got in the mail what you got on that day. So tell the folks at home what arrived for you in the mail the other day.
Well, here in the secret files from Let's Get Physical Media, a new excerpt on Robservations. Yeah, we were talking about combinations of things that we get. Like, we also talked about, for example, some of the Japanese, model kits that you get, plus other things that are probably super unlikely combinations. In my particular case, I got a 4K import from Germany, which I believe Dieter showed on one of the earlier episodes.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
The 2022 Hellraiser. So I imported that from Deutschland, and it was beautiful. And on that same day, I also received a used copy, because why would you pay, for a new copy of this? DVD, not Blu-ray or 4K, of Home Alone 3.
Okay, now you got to explain, because this is why I love you so much. You got to explain, why would you order Home Alone 3? What were you doing?
Well, as you know, I had until recently not watched any of the films in the Home Alone franchise. And I always think it's fun to chase down the bad sequels in long-running series, especially when they far outstay their welcome. It's just really interesting to see how the creatives are, trying to redo the formula and the whole phenomenon of diminishing returns, et cetera, et cetera. Now, to be fair, Home Alone 3, not to go on a long, digression about the Home Alone franchise for the scholars out there.
But that's the thing. You were going into a deep dive into the Home Alone franchise.
I did, and I ended up watching all 6 films. And I will say again, on record, I think Home Alone 6 may be the finest entry in that franchise. Home, Sweet Home Alone. It's technically probably the most interesting of the 6 films, and it has the most different types of humor and so on and so forth. But anyway, Home Alone 3 is the last of the Home Alone movies that was released theatrically. And so in my mind, there's sort of the theatrical trilogy is the first half of the Home Alone saga. And I do own Home Alone on 4K. So clearly, it's also, okay, this is something that you didn't know, but there's a nice little symmetry in the drop down, not only of the quality, but the reduction in quality is mirrored by the reduction of the formats in which these films are available. Home Alone is available on 4K. Home Alone 2 is available on Blu-ray. Home Alone 3 is available on DVD.
That's why I love you, man. Alvaro, you're the best. I want to thank everybody for watching this show, tuning in. I'm going to go catch up on the Golden Globes, see what happened. What do you guys think about Doomsday? Are you hoping, there's a lot of people, like for me, if for no other reason, I know that Kevin Feige and Disney and everybody, Robert Downey Jr., they've all gone, they're all in, man. We're at Casino Royale, and we've got Le Chiffre playing James Bond right now, and they're going all in. They're going all fucking in. And how often do you get that in the entertainment space? And if for nothing else, I am all in on Doomsday. I've got good reason to be. I wish I could tell you what all that is. I can't. But I am fucking all in on Doomsday. All in, 100%. I think Doomsday is going to be one of the greatest experiences in the theater you could possibly have. I'm all in because it has to be. Because everybody involved and they have pulled out no expense. It's like, you know what? Here's the thing. I think about John Hammond and Jurassic Park. No expense was spared. There's a little Jeff Goldblum in me that says, just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. So there's that too. But the fact is, they had to do something. Because a moribund franchise is sadder than a franchise that comes back from the dead. You know what I mean?
And here's what I would propose to you, Rob. A year from now, so roughly January 11th, that'll be enough time for the dust to have settled. 2 or 3 weeks into the release of this film. Let's reconvene and let's compare notes.
Guarantee it. The poll that I asked everybody to say, should I go see a screening with Chris Gore, Steve Frosty, Collider, a screening of Star Trek, Starfleet Academy? It's 59% people are saying that I should go. Thing is, it's a 180-mile round trip for me to do it, and that I didn't put that in the thing, but yeah. Clarence Maxwell in the chat said Home Alone with a Vengeance was the best. Very funny. And on that note, everybody, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for the wonderful letter. I want to thank him also for moderating, and all the people that support this channel via super chats and tips. Thank you very much. And maybe the guy who called me a liar will tell me what he thinks I'm lying about. I hate when people do that. It's like, you're a liar. What? Are you an ex-girlfriend? What are you? But anyway, we'll find out. But I want to thank everybody, and remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I'll see everybody tomorrow on the John Campea Show. Probably still contemplating if I want to make that 180-mile round-trip journey. Twist my arm and live long and prosper. All right, we are out.